It's Friday night, people, and you know what that means. It's time to get crazy with Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and thank you for joining me for our weekly Friday edition of the show, where we cover off on the lore or history of one piece of content from vanilla World of Warcraft. Now, I do apologize that this episode is a little bit late today, but technically it is still Friday on the West Coast, so I'm claiming a small technical victory on that one. But real life will get in the way occasionally, everyone, so if sometimes the podcast is just a little bit late by perhaps 12 to 24 hours, then I do apologize, but know that it will come to you eventually. Now, the first 45 minutes or so of this show is story time, as I read out a collation of entries that you can find at the amazing WoWWiki and WoWpedia websites. However, if you're not much of a lore buff, or you want to read those entries in your own time, then please feel free to skip ahead to the second half of the episode, where we'll go through community reactions to the content from back in the day, and get through a bit of fun with regular segments, anger management, and tidbits. If you're a fan of the show and you haven't done so yet, then please do subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and like, follow, or subscribe to the show on all social media platforms, which you can find the links to at countdowntoclassic.com. But for now, let's get straight into it with a scoop of vanilla. Thrall, that leviathan of a character. Where shall we begin with such a huge task of telling you all about the history of one of the central characters of the Warcraft universe? Well, how about this for a thought? Let's just start at the beginning. But when I say the beginning, I mean the beginning. So let's talk a bit of the birds and the bees with how Thrall came to be. Well, you see, when a male orc warrior and a female orc warrior love each other very much... Okay, I won't get into the sticky details, but let's start with Mum and Dad, and this orcish version of the Notebook with Durotan and Draka, as it's important to know who Thrall's parents were in order to get that deep insight into Thrall himself and what he's all about. So let's jump in at that point with a little bit of a long origin story with Durotan and Draka. In the years prior to the First War between orcs and humans, Durotan, an orcish warrior, was the son of Garad, chieftain of the Frostwolf clan, one of many orcish clans of Draenor, making Durotan the heir apparent to the role. He cared deeply about the world and those living in it, and this sensitivity could have been the signs of being a shaman, but for Durotan, it was just the way he was. Durotan was developing into a strong, admirable young orc and was approaching his rite of passage at the Kosh Arg celebrations, a twice-a-year festival held in spring and autumn that acted as the only time all the orc clans would officially get together. Held in the shadow of a Shogun, a great white diamond monolith in Nagrand revered by the orcs, its purpose was to act as somewhat of an orc summit, where clans could discuss orcish matters. The festival also afforded the shaman of each clan the opportunity to climb the peaks of a Shogun, to spiritually commune with their orc ancestors and the other shamans. Outside of this festival, orcish clans rarely got together to shoot the shit. At the beginning of the festival, Durotan was asked to go to bed early by his chieftain father. However, Durotan, not liking being treated like a child, instead snuck away from his bed, wanting to see what the adults were discussing. This mischievous decision led to a chance encounter with Orgrim Doomhammer. While Orgrim was not in line to be a chieftain like Durotan, he was a member of the Blackrock clan, a prominent Orcish clan hailing from the caverns of Gorgrond, known for their strict military discipline and skills in mining and blacksmithing. Much to the surprise of both Blackrock and Frostwolf clans, the two struck up a friendship, ignoring the boundaries between clans because, as Durotan said, just because something had not been done before did not mean that it was not possible. After this meeting, Durotan was eventually brought to Oshugun by request of the ancestors, seeking to test whether he could become a shaman as well as chieftain of his clan. Alas, he did not see the ancestors, though he knew they were there somehow, and it was clear that Durotan was not destined to be a shaman. But after the festival, Durotan and Orgrim became great friends, with the two young orcs challenging each other often to feats of strength and skill. And one such test led to both of them racing each other through the forests of Terakar one day. Orgrim won the race, but neither really had a chance to celebrate before an ogre appeared. This rampaging ogre attacked, and the young orcs would have been killed if not for the timely arrival of a Draenei hunting party from Telmor, a hidden Draenei city within the forest, which was led by Restalan, second in command of the prophet Velen, the leader of the Draenei. Sending word to their clans, Restalan took the two orcs to Telmor and informed them that the prophet Velen was in the town and invited the two to dinner. They discussed their people's histories together, with Durotan even commenting that he and Orgrim learned more about the Draenei in that period than their entire race had in over a century. Immediately upon returning to his clan after this experience, Durotan met a young female Frostwolf orc named Draka, whom he had never come across before. Durotan was smitten at first sight as he and Orgrim stared in awe at the stunning female warrior, with Durotan not believing that she could be a member of his clan. Durotan invited Draka to join him on a courtship hunt, but was left slack-jawed when she refused the future chieftain. However, she did accept an invitation for nothing more than a simple hunt. In what may be perceived as some harsh orcish friend-zoning, Draka's reasoning for rebuffing Durotan's initial invitation was that she was considered too young to accept a courtship hunt invitation at the time that Durotan threw the invitation out there. However, later on, when they eventually went out on their simple hunt, whilst trailing a cleft hoof, they were attacked by a black wolf. After killing the wolf together, Draka revealed to Durotan that she was actually now of age to date on that day, and she romantically kissed Durotan. One thing led to another, and yada yada yada, they became a couple. Yes, I just yada yada'd orc sex for all of you Seinfeld fans out there. Sometime later, Durotan's father Garrod was killed in battle against a group of ogres and Gron, and Durotan became the chieftain of the Frostwolf clan by hereditary right. It was not long after this that Ner'zhul and Gul'dan started making some moves. A lot of stuff happened that I won't go into. Perhaps that's for another time. But basically, we'll cut to the point where the clans were united into the first horde. Gul'dan called the clans to a mountain he named the Throne of Kil'jaeden in what is now Hellfire Peninsula to partake of Kil'jaeden's gift, the blood of Manaroth. Kil'jaeden was a powerful Eredar demon lord and leader of the Burning Legion, and Manaroth was the barbaric second in charge of the Pit Lords, whose blood was offered to the Orc chieftains as a way in which to realize unimaginable strength. However, Durotan, having been warned by the now subservient Ner'zhul, refused to partake, as did his friend Orgrim, causing both to fall under the suspicion of Gul'dan. Gul'dan sought to eliminate Durotan and freed a Draenei slave of Blackhand, Blackhand being the leader of the Horde at the time, with Gul'dan blaming the escape of the slave on Durotan. Blackhand was enraged and he dueled Durotan, who had actually sheltered the Draenei after finding her in the wilderness. The plan didn't work, however, and Durotan was not defeated and killed, for the Draenei, Tanara, had left in the midst of the battle, and the two orcs had stopped fighting after they discovered this. Now, a few more things happen from here with the fall of the city of Shatrath and the disappearance of Kil'jaeden, but eventually the Horde turned on itself, with no enemies left to fight. It was at this time that Gul'dan was visited in his dreams by the human sorcerer Medivh, who was possessed by the Dark Titan. Medivh commanded Gul'dan to construct a gateway, and that together they would open a great portal between Draenor and the world of Medivh. Durotan continued to voice opposition against the Horde leadership. When the Horde crossed over into Azeroth, Gul'dan sent Durotan and the entire Frostwolf clan, including Draka, into exile. Apparently accepting their fate, Durotan and the Frostwolf clan settled deep in a hidden valley in the Alterac Mountains, far to the north of the Kingdom of Azeroth. There, they lived throughout the First War. It was at the end of the First War that Draka, Durotan's now mate and most stalwart supporter, gave birth to Durotan's son and heir, naming the child Goel. Realizing that there was far more at stake now that his legacy would live on, Durotan decided to take action against the evil Gul'dan and travelled to the encampment of the only other orc who had stood by him, Orgrim Doomhammer. Doomhammer had by this time assassinated Blackhand and himself become the war chief of the Horde, and he welcomed Durotan and Draka into his encampment. Durotan exposed Gul'dan's corruption, and Doomhammer vowed that he would stand at Durotan's side as they confronted Gul'dan with his crimes. But for the good of his warriors and Durotan as well, he had to send them away to what he thought was a safe place. It was found out later, however, that several of Doomhammer's warriors had been Gul'dan's spies, and one of them had accompanied Durotan and Draka to their safe haven. The treacherous guard had summoned assassins to kill the Frostwolf chieftain and his mate at their refuge. The spies attacked, and Draka was slain in the encounter. And though he managed to kill at least one of them, Durotan was overcome by the assassins as well, and was left too severely wounded to continue in battle. And severely wounded is putting it lightly, as horrifically, not only was he defeated in battle and left to die by his assailants, but in a macabre fashion, they sliced his arms off in order to prevent him from holding his screaming nearby child again before he died. Durotan, mighty chief of the noble Frostwolf clan, died slowly in horrible pain as the lifeblood drained out of him, collapsing next to his son, the last of his line. The final thought that ran through Durotan's mind was a sense of relief that at least his death would spare him the horror of having to see his infant son inevitably torn apart by the creatures of the forest. A terrified and confused baby Goel lay screaming amongst the bodies of his fallen parents, surely soon to face death himself. However, a human named Aedelas Blackmoore was out nearby on a hunt with his servant Tamis when he heard the cries of the infant orc. Seizing the baby orc from the dismembered bodies of his parents, Blackmoore took the child back to Durnholde Keep, a human settlement east of Tarren Mill in the Hillsbrad foothills, which served as the command centre of the orc internment camps. Following the conclusion of the Second War, in which the humans decimated the Horde, reclaiming their previously usurped lands, the surviving orcs were rounded up and imprisoned in internment camps, the majority of which were under the watch of Blackmoore, headquartered at Durnholde Keep. Surprisingly, the orcish prisoners seemed to lose their energy over time and acted more and more apathetic and resigned to their fates. Fights, whether between two prisoners or between prisoners and guards, decreased in frequency until they were virtually unheard of. The once fearsome race of warriors had become a pitiful people to whom even moving around didn't seem worth the effort, and many prisoners could be seen sitting in their own filth. Some in the Alliance became worried that these were symptoms of some sort of disease, and that it might be contagious and contractable by other races. But Antonidas of the Kirin Tor developed a different theory as to the reason for this dramatic change in behaviour, a theory which proved to be correct. The orcs had been under the influence of demonic and warlock magics for so long that they had become unable to function without them. The orcish prisoners were suffering withdrawal symptoms. Most of the people with whom he shared his theory saw no reason to do anything to cure the orcs of their condition, something which the compassionate Antonidas had unsuccessfully attempted to do on his own. After all, these were the same orcs who had conquered Azeroth and slaughtered countless humans, and now they had become as harmless as sheep. Few people considered that to be a bad thing. Because the prisoners at the camps had gone so long without making trouble, security measures had become very lax. Since nobody ever tried to escape, fewer and fewer guards were assigned to each camp, and the walls were easy to scale if one were so inclined, which one never was, at least for a while. Durnholde Keep was run as far from the happiest place in Azeroth under Blackmoore's command. Blackmoore was the son of Aedelas Blackmoore, a general in Lordaeron's army who had been convicted of selling state secrets when Aedelas was a child. A veteran of the Second War, Blackmoore had proven himself quite effective in combat, amassing a record of victories and demonstrating a particular ferocity in fighting against the orcs. What wasn't generally known was that while Blackmoore acquitted himself well on the battlefield, his courage in battle was often boosted by alcohol, as Blackmoore was a heavy drinker. It's possible that Blackmoore's drinking problem originated from his frustration at having to live with the stigma of being the son of a traitor, as some said. Due to his father's treachery and the suspicion of his peers that such traits were hereditary, Blackmoore had to repeatedly prove himself and work harder than other soldiers and officers in order to earn the respect he so craved. This did not have a positive effect on his disposition, to put it mildly. Despite the stigma he bore on his name, he rose to the position of overseer of all the orcish internment camps in Azeroth, moving the headquarters from New Stormwind to his fortress, Durnholde. With the war over and finding himself elevated to a position which placed fewer restrictions on his behaviour, Blackmoore had more free time and spent most of it drinking. Unfortunately for Blackmoore, his often public intoxication did nothing to help his reputation. In addition to people whispering about him being the son of a traitor, albeit one who had proven himself in battle and risen to the rank of lieutenant, they now also considered him a drunk, and with all rights too. Blackmoore was capable of occasional kindness and civility when sober, but more often than not was temperamental and impatient without being concerned in the least for how his actions affected others. As bad as he could be when he was sober, Blackmoore exhibited even more of a vicious streak when drunk. Upon bringing Goel back to Durnholde, Blackmoore was quite unsure of how to raise a baby orc. Luckily, another resident of Durnholde, 5-year-old Taretha Foxton, ensured Goel's survival as an infant by being the only person in Durnholde to realise that as Goel was a baby, he simply couldn't eat the meat the guards gave him because he didn't have teeth. When she innocently posed this information, Goel's diet was hastily changed to milk, and he thrived in the Foxton household, nursed by Taretha's own mother. When Goel was eventually weaned, he was taken away, and Taretha wept bitter tears for the green-skinned child she regarded as her little brother. Goel was eventually given the name Thrall by Blackmoore, and he grew up under human tutelage, learning the skills of a warrior before his teens, and also demonstrating a keen intellect during the lessons he was given by human educators. Over the years, he learned to read and write, as Taretha, in her pre-teens herself, was given the task to bring books on military strategy to Thrall, at the suggestion of Blackmoore's military advisor, Sergeant, in order to train the young orc in tactics and war. Taretha used the books to keep up a correspondence with Thrall by slipping notes inside the pages and managing to hide her sharp intelligence from Blackmoore. Thrall, however, also went on to earn Blackmoore a good deal of money in the gladiatorial ring. It was there he was pitted against the champions of other rich and prominent people. However, noticing Thrall's aptitude as a student and ferocity as a gladiator, Blackmoore had more in mind for Thrall than merely making him into a great gladiator. He had only revealed his plan to his most trusted confidant, Caraman Langston, telling him that he would raise Thrall to become a general so that Blackmoore could send an army of orcs made up of the prisoners in the internment camps against a splintering alliance. Thrall would earn the orcs' trust and respect in Blackmoore's plan and would lead them into battle. But Thrall would also have been conditioned to be completely loyal and obedient to Blackmoore by that time, and would surely turn over the kingdom to the human lord once he had conquered it. It seemed that treachery did indeed run in the blood, or that if one is suspected of being a traitor his entire life, he might come to resent his accusers enough to betray them in reality. As Thrall continued to grow, so did Blackmoore's lifestyle. To his credit, in the years since he had found the baby orc, he rose from the rank of lieutenant to lieutenant general. But he sank deeper into drunkenness and frequently used Taretha, again, the daughter of his servant Tamis, as a concubine. Taretha and Thrall, however, would grow close over time and continue to talk in secret, with Taretha becoming the closest thing Thrall had ever had to family. And I'm just going to quote you some lines throughout now from the Christie Golden novels, and the first one is this. "They call you a monster," she said, her voice thick again as she stepped away from him. "But they're the monsters, not you." Having taken on Taretha as his concubine, Blackmoore was apparently rough with Taretha during sex, as one day Thrall noticed a bruise on her wrist, which Taretha admitted was from being with Blackmoore, and Thrall may have suspected that there was some sexual abuse going on. Taretha was sad and ashamed with the situation, but in no position to refuse her lord. Since Taretha's mother had reluctantly been Thrall's wet nurse, it's possible that Blackmoore threatened to reveal that embarrassing fact to the masses if Taretha didn't cooperate fully. During Thrall's life at Durnholde, there had been times when Blackmoore was nice to him, and many other times when Blackmoore treated him terribly. And again, we go back to Christie Golden. Thrall hesitated, then lifted his blue-eyed gaze. Blackmoore's eyes bored into his own. "Do you know what your name means?" "No, sir." His voice sounded so rough and deep, even in his own ears, next to the musical lilt of the humans' voices. "It means slave. It means that you belong to me." Blackmoore stepped forward and prodded the orc's chest with a stiff forefinger. "It means that I own you. Do you understand that?" For a moment, Thrall was so shocked he didn't reply. His name meant slave? It sounded so pleasant when humans spoke it. He thought it must be a good name, a worthy name. Thrall's response to his mistreatment was to try to do better. Be a better gladiator, a better student, a better Thrall. Surely if he performed his task well enough, Blackmoore would be kinder to him and not punish him. This naive notion was dispelled one terrible day. On this day, Thrall would be convinced that he had to escape from Blackmoore's clutches at any cost. On the day, Thrall had fought 8 straight bouts in the arena, victorious in every one. Blackmoore was pleased. He had come to expect nothing less from his undefeated pet orc. But Thrall tired more and more with each bout, and after the 8th contest against a pair of large mountain cats, Thrall was bleeding in addition to being so exhausted he could barely remain standing. The sergeant who had trained Thrall had advised Blackmoore not to push him too hard, partly out of pragmatism, but also out of concern for his student. Blackmoore would hear none of it, confident that Thrall was unbeatable and eager to take money from any who cared to bet against Thrall. The more tired Thrall got, after all, the higher the odds against him became, and the more money Blackmoore would win. Drunk at the time, just for a change, Blackmoore also resented what he perceived to be laziness on Thrall's part. It was with this reasoning in mind that Blackmoore forced Thrall to fight a 9th bout against arguably the most deadly opponent he would face that day, an ogre who towered Thrall in size and was well rested. Thrall was impaled on the ogre's spear and beaten to within an inch of his life before the two fighters were separated and Thrall was carried back to his cell. Blackmoore was enraged that Thrall had allowed himself to be defeated, causing him to lose thousands in gold, and had embarrassed him greatly. Lying in his cell in excruciating agony, Thrall hoped that the healers would soon arrive, as Blackmoore had always sent them in the past to fix him up after fights. He remembered how Blackmoore had praised him so many times in the past after he had won, after he had made Blackmoore money. Thrall had no reason to expect anything different this time. He knew he had lost against the ogre, but he was sure that Blackmoore would understand and be impressed that Thrall had fought 9 bouts in a row, something which had never been done before, and won 8 of them. Thus, it was a rude awakening when a drunken and angry Blackmoore entered his cell and informed him that the healers would not be coming anytime soon, and raged at how Thrall had cost him so much money by losing, and he began to beat and kick the grievously injured orc viciously. Thrall wasn't able to do anything but lie there and take it. And even when Blackmoore had finally worn himself out, it wasn't finished. Many others had bet on Thrall and lost money as well, and Blackmoore invited all of them to join in on the punishment. Man after man entered the cell and vented his anger on the helpless orc before he finally, mercifully, lost consciousness. After he had finally been healed, not out of mercy, but so he would remain alive to fight for Blackmoore again, Thrall was visited by the man who had trained him to fight, a man he knew only as Sergeant. Sergeant told Thrall he wished he'd been there earlier to stop the beatings, and that he had pulled the men off the orc as soon as he discovered what was happening. Sergeant sympathised with Thrall and told him that he had done extremely well in the ring, that Blackmoore should have been proud of him, and that he didn't deserve to be treated so horribly. Sergeant then left Thrall to sleep, but the damage was done. Thrall was grateful to Sergeant for his kindness, but now he knew that he would never be able to please Blackmoore, and that the man would never be satisfied enough with his performance to give him any love or respect. It was on that night that Thrall vowed to escape. And Thrall did escape, with Taretha's help, as she set all the animals within Durnholde Keep free as a distraction and set a fire within the encampment, and left her friend a large cloak with which he could escape by sneaking out the front gate while the guards were busy. With the word that Thrall was on the loose reaching the capital, Blackmoore was called before King Terenas, the ruler of Lordaeron, and his son, Prince Arthas, to account for his actions. The king was incredulous that Blackmoore had decided to train and educate an orc, not knowing Blackmoore's true intention, of course, and threatened to send a representative of the crown to ensure that the funds being provided for the maintenance of Durnholde and the camps were being properly distributed if Blackmoore could not account for them himself. Blackmoore scoured the countryside on the hunt for the escapee orc, almost capturing Thrall again at Remke's camp, Remke being a human female running another internment camp under the guise of being a male officer. It was during his time at Remke's camp, one of many internment camps that a now freed Thrall had visited, that Thrall met an old orc with glowing red eyes named Kelgar. Kelgar spoke with Thrall at length, captivating the young orc with tale after tale of orcish accomplishments, their history and their culture. And we turn back to Christy Golden. "Oh yes," Kelgar said sadly. "Once, before we were the proud, battle-hungry horde, we were individual clans, and in those clans were those who knew the magic of wind and water, of sky and land, of all the spirits of the wild, and they worked in harmony with those powers. We called them shamans, and until the emergence of the warlocks, their skills were all we knew of power." Thrall hungrily absorbed all that the wise old orc had to say about their people and inquired as to why, if the orcs were such a strong and proud race, they sat complacently in the internment camps. Kelgar shook his head. "It is not the strength that is gone, Thrall. I could kill the guards in a heartbeat. Anyone here could. It's the desire. I do not wish to try to climb the walls. I want to stay here. I can't explain it, and I'm ashamed, but that is the truth. You will have to have the passion, the fire, for all of us here." Kelgar told him of the corruption of Gul'dan and how the old ways had been so much better for the Horde. He told Thrall that the only one still thinking of embracing this was the undefeated Grom Hellscream, chieftain of the Warsong clan. When another prisoner told Thrall that Blackmoore had arrived at the camp looking for him, Thrall escaped again and searched for Grom Hellscream, continuing to elude Blackmoore along the way. Thrall had been shocked by what he had seen at the internment camps, as his fellow orcs that he came across had been listless slaves, lacking any kind of energy, and couldn't have been further removed from the proud and bold fighters that his people once had been, that he had read about in books growing up. Thrall had already escaped Remke's camp by the time Blackmoore arrived at the camp, but the soldiers who captured him at Remke's camp had taken his possessions and still had them at the camp for Blackmoore to inspect. Among those possessions were letters from Taretha, which Thrall had saved for their sentimental value. Blackmoore felt angry and betrayed, but kept his knowledge of the friendship between Taretha and Thrall hidden from Taretha at that time. After finding Grom Hellscream and proving himself, Thrall was taken under Hellscream's wing and taught the Orcish tongue. Grom revealed to him that Thrall was part of the exiled Frostwolf clan, as evidenced by the tattered swaddling cloth Thrall showed him. One day, Hellscream broached the subject of Thrall's given name. And we go back to Christie Golden's novels. "Should we then change your other name? It is the term of a slave," said Hellscream, squatting and watching Thrall closely with red eyes. "It was meant to be a badge of shame." Thrall thought as he chewed and swallowed. "No. Blackmoore gave me the name so that I would never forget that I was something he owned, that I belonged to him." His eyes narrowed. "I never will. I will keep the name, and one day, when I see him again, he will be the one who remembers what he did to me and regret it with all his heart." After spending some time with Hellscream, Thrall decided to depart and search out his roots in the Alterac Mountains. After trekking to exhaustion, Thrall was rescued by the Frostwolves and taken to their camp. There, he met Drekthar, the elder shaman and seer of the Frostwolf clan, who told Thrall that he was the son of the chieftain of the Frostwolves. After finding his place among the Frostwolves, Thrall was taught the old ways of the Horde by Drekthar, who immediately saw great shamanistic potential in Thrall and educated Thrall on the Orcish ways, as they were before Gul'dan's corruption. Back to Christie Golden. "I believe that the lethargy you reported seeing in the camps is the emptiness our people are feeling when the demonic energies have been withdrawn. Without that external energy, they feel weak, bereft. They may not even know why they feel this way, or care enough to ponder it. They are like empty cups, Thrall, that were once filled with poison. Now they cry out to be filled with something wholesome once again. That which they yearn for is the nourishment of the old ways, shamanism, a reconnection with the simple and pure powers of the natural forces and laws, will fill them again and assuage that dreadful hunger. This, and only this, will rouse them from their stupor and remind them of the proud, courageous line from which we have all come." Soon Thrall was accepted as a member of the clan. A Frostwolf named Snowsong eventually chose Thrall as her companion. It was some time after that choosing that he was called away by Drekthar and came upon a quiet place where he'd never been or seen before. Here he was to be initiated. In one of the most spiritual experiences of his life, Thrall befriended the spirits of earth, air, fire, water, and the wilds. He became the first new shaman since Gul'dan's vile corruption of the Horde. He returned to the camp a new orc and became fully immersed in the old ways of the shaman and his clan, embracing his role as son of the chieftain. This was a significant and symbolic event, since Thrall was the first shaman to be accepted by the spirits since Drekthar's time. Not only did this mean Thrall would be destined to be one of the greatest shamans in Orcish history, but it also meant that the spirits finally forgave the Orcish race for consorting with demonic powers, and deemed Thrall as the first of a new generation of shamans. Drekthar realized that his trust in the young orc was well-founded, and that Thrall, via his free spirit, lack of demonic corruption, and shamanistic capabilities, was destined for greatness. Back to Christie Golden. "Well done, my child," said Drekthar, his voice trembling with emotion. "I had hoped they would accept. Thrall, you must know, it has been years, nay, decades, since the spirits have accepted a shaman. They were angry with us for our warlocks' dark bargain, their corruption of magic. There are only a few shamans left now, and all are as old as I. The spirits have waited for someone worthy upon whom to bestow their gifts. You are the first in a long, long time to be so honored. I had feared that the spirits would forever refuse to work with us again, but Thrall, I have never seen a stronger shaman in my life, and you are only beginning." I thought it would feel so powerful," stammered Thrall, his voice faint. "But instead, I am so humbled." "And it is that which makes you worthy." He reached out and stroked Thrall's cheek. "Durotan and Draka would be so proud of you." The camp was soon visited by a wandering stranger. At first, Thrall spoke pleasantly with him, but began to grow angry when the stranger accused the Frostwolves of hiding away in the mountains. His fury and orcish pride growing within him, Thrall informed the stranger that he would join with Hellscream and the war song and lay siege to the encampments. The stranger dismissed Hellscream as a demon-ridden dreamer and said that the humans were not worth fighting. Enraged, Thrall challenged the stranger to single combat. The stranger threw aside his cloak to reveal well-worn black plate armor and a massive warhammer. After a short but brutal contest, Thrall managed to disarm his foe, but was prevented from throttling the stranger by some of his clan. It was then the stranger revealed himself as Orgrim Doomhammer, the war chief of the Horde. Doomhammer had been contacted by Drekthar about the return of the son of Durotan. The war chief decided to provoke Thrall into a fight to see if Drekthar's praise was deserved, and it was. Not only was Thrall able to challenge Doomhammer's strength, he was also able to best him, a feat only once before accomplished by Thrall's father. Doomhammer named Thrall his second in command and explained his strategy for liberating the encampments. Per Doomhammer's plan, Thrall infiltrated the camps, masquerading as one of the downtrodden lethargic prisoners, and then riled the orcs up with shows of his shamanistic powers. With the downtrodden orcs revitalized by their restored heritage, they quickly overran the encampments. On the first 3 encampments, this proved to be an effective tactic. On the 4th, Thrall was too easily recognized, and thus they had to resort to the numbers of the new horde, and the shamanistic powers wielded by Thrall to liberate the encampment. At the 5th, however, the enemy was even better prepared, with knights from Durnholde stationed at the remaining encampments. During the liberation of this encampment, now the Horde outpost of Hammerfall in the Arathi Highlands, Doomhammer was killed, impaled from behind by a knight's lance. With his dying breath, he gave Thrall his black plate and warhammer, and named him War Chief of the Horde. Thrall's first action as war chief, at all of 18 years old, was to attack Durnholde in an effort to dismantle the entire internment camp system. And that is where I will leave the story at part 1 of a 2-part venture into the whole background of Thrall, War Chief of the Horde. And with all that done, now it's time to hear what we were saying about Thrall with That's What We Said. Every Friday on Countdown to Classic, we recount some of the thoughts and feelings of the community on the content that we've just covered. Now today, obviously, we touched on Thrall. So I perused a lot of forums to figure out how we generally felt about Thrall as a character. And I was surprised at what I found. There was a lot of positive and a lot of negative. So what I figured, considering this is a 2-part series on Thrall, this Friday and next Friday, today we're just going to cover off on the negative posts, and there were a lot of them. But don't distress if you love Thrall, because next week we'll cover all the positive posts and throw him a bit of love. And that's what we do here on the show. We cover both sides of the coin, so everyone gets a say. Unfortunately, this episode, it's only the one crowd that will get a say, but I promise the pro Thrall people will get in next week, so stay tuned then. But today we start with this post from official forum user Nomenclature, and that's nomenclature spelt as you would think, with gnome, Gnome. Very funny. Now, Nomenclature says this: Why is there so much contempt for Thrall on these forums? Why is he called Green Jesus by so many people? Thrall is really the only halfway decently developed character that they have, lore-wise. I can understand Alliance players wanting one of their guys to get some more attention, but as a Horde player, I see a good deal of Alliance main characters in the game, such as Malfurion. I guess maybe you don't see Malfurion as an Alliance guy, perhaps? I think the solution would be to write better Alliance characters, not just hate Thrall. And straight off the bat, we get a really interesting point because I was genuinely shocked to see the amount of pure hatred and vitriol for the character of Thrall. Admittedly, I have never typed into a Google search, Thrall, forums, like or hate, how do people feel about Thrall, Thrall sucks, fuck Thrall, all that kind of stuff. I have never typed that into a search before, but I did for the research for this episode. And to get the amount of results that I did and some of the really passionate hatred that people have for this character, whom I had just presumed was universally beloved, was amazing and really quite interesting. So straight away we find out that, hey, there's a lot of players out there that hate Thrall. But why? Well, as this post suggests, he gets the moniker Green Jesus a lot. But you might scratch your head, some of you saying, Green Jesus? What's that supposed to mean? And I will go on to explain that in some of the later posts. But the post here does raise an interesting question. Do we have a situation where Blizzard has severely underdeveloped Alliance main characters within the narrative of the game and focus simply on the Horde, namely via Thrall? Well, we'll move on to the next post from MMO champion user Oneirophobia, who says this. A lot of people hate Thrall. Unfortunately, he is Chris Metzen's way of living out his midlife crisis. So I expect him heavily involved as a main hero, saving the day in literally everything that ever happens. He's protected by a huge layer of plot armor. So unlike characters on the Alliance side, who at least have the interesting threat of being killed off, he's going to be around forever. And that is an interesting point. Thrall does seem to have some pretty heavy plot armor. He has been around for a long time now. Obviously, Warcraft 3. We get walked through a lot of the trials and tribulations of Thrall, much of which obviously we haven't covered off here today. It will be touched on in part 2 of Thrall's story next week. But we are very, very familiar with this character due to a lot of exposure to him now over multiple games. Blizzard clearly has a pretty strong interest in Thrall, and some find it odd that this is the only character that they've sunk so much time into developing and producing to us as the face of the game. Obviously there's some Alliance main characters, but people feel that they haven't received anywhere near as much as attention as Thrall has. And due to the attention that Thrall gets, it further builds that layer upon layer of plot armor. Now, some do speculate that eventually we will see the end of Thrall and, perhaps what ending that will be. But maybe it'll come in the next expansion. Who knows? It's got to end at some point, right? You can only be a successful warrior for so long. Someone's got to come along and take down the king. But anyway, we'll see what they do with him. But an interesting point there that I have seen around multiple spots on the forums is this idea that Chris Metzen went a little bit nuts with Thrall. Now, many of you know Chris Metzen, one of the former bigwigs at Blizzard who's no longer there, but Chris Metzen obviously had a lot to say with the development of Thrall, and people felt he was building up this amazing character as perhaps someone that he wanted to be. I think that's a little bit crude in a way in terms of like just having a shot at Chris Metzen, but he's a writer. Let him do what he wants. If he wants to make an awesome character, then so be it. But I do see where they're coming from at the very least. But we'll move on to the next post from forum user Barchi, the official forums, who says this. That is why people dislike him. He is the only character getting development. So much so that the other characters who are supposed to be developed get sidelined by Thrall. And this post touches on what I mentioned earlier in terms of the fact that Blizzard seems to have a rather odd tunnel vision when it comes to development of characters. Why is Thrall the only person that the writing team seems to just keep coming back to? Hey guys, we've got a whole other faction over there with the Alliance. And I know people might say that post-vanilla, obviously we've gotten Varian Rin, Jaina Proudmoore, all that stuff. Varian Rin's gotten a fair bit of action over time, but nothing near the extent of what Thrall got, even through, say, something like Cataclysm, where he was pretty much the sole focus of that expansion in a certain way. But we move on now to user Kylan, who says this: I'm mostly annoyed with him because even though his failure to rein his people in about Ashenvale after the Third War is the single greatest reason for the Night Elves being at war with the Horde in the first place, he still consistently trotted out as some messianic peacemaker, giving constant lectures about putting aside petty differences, even though you looked the other way when the war song were committing wars on your behalf, so long as it helped the Horde. Now, I enjoyed that post because it actually touched on the lore, and why within the lore there are reasons that Thrall isn't perhaps so perfect. He's not the greatest person in the world because he has been believed to somewhat look the other way for certain indiscrepancies committed by the Horde. Ashenvale is a great example. We touched recently on Warsong Gulch and what was happening in Ashenvale to cause the Night Elves and the Orcs to hate each other so much and obviously commune around that Warsong Gulch battleground. And it was said that Thrall kind of let Grom go off and do his own thing and cause a bit of trouble in that Ashenvale area, encroaching with the lumber mills and things like that. And he did a lot of that relatively unchallenged. It was only when things really kind of went too far that Thrall cracked the shits with Grom and said, hey buddy, what are you doing? You've crossed the line here. But then it was too late. And that kind of spawned an obviously ongoing war with the Night Elves. But also, people think that his peacemaker role is a little bit overblown due to some of the lengths that he'll go to make that peace, such as some actions in Theramore that we'll touch on next week. But we move on to the next post from Casual Area Plague over at MMO Champion, who says this: Thrall sucks. Thrall is a family man. Gonna sound like a jerk here and probably piss people off, but family men do not make good rulers. Why doesn't Thrall just go live in some nice suburb, get busy with his orc girl, pump out a few brat kids, and work some mundane 9 to 5 like everyone else on the planet? That's the kind of person Thrall is, and that's why everyone likes him so much, because he is like them, just mediocre and too lazy to really succeed at anything worthwhile. I hate Thrall and everything he stands for. I want Garrosh to be my war chief. He's stronger, better, and tougher than Thrall will ever be. Thrall is just too goody-goody for me. His life is like a make-believe fairy tale you see on the TV when the prom king and quarterback of the high school football team marries the head cheerleader and prom queen, and they live happily ever after. What a load of bullshit. Are you not tired of that stuff being crammed down your throat? It's so childish. And that is somewhat of a good point. As we mentioned earlier, things seem to go a little too well for Thrall at all times. We talk about the notion of things like the Mary Sue, or the Marty Sue, if you will. The perfect fictional character. They can do no wrong, they are awesome at everything, and everyone loves them. That does somewhat describe Thrall. He is popular. He can kind of do everything. He got the great girl. Everything worked out for him. So, how does that make you feel from a narrative standpoint? Do you feel that the Marty Sue dial has been ratcheted up to 11? Write to the show and let me know. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. We move on to a post from Discord user 7 Winters, who says this: This was after vanilla, but I really hated how he stole all the raid kills, lol. We would work hard to kill Deathwing, and then at the last second he shows up and steals the kill. We worked hard to kill Garrosh, and then he ends up getting that kill too, lol. I guess Blizzard didn't want to make the player characters seem too powerful, and have lore characters involved as well, but it always made me mad. Also, I didn't like that he was considered an equal to the dragon aspects. I don't think he should be that powerful, but again, that's Cataclysm lore. He's still kind of a Marty Sue in my opinion. And that's definitely factually correct. Thrall went on in later expansions, obviously Cataclysm, as I mentioned earlier, he got a boatload of story moments there, but he started to move in and just basically take a lot of these final kills. Garrosh, Deathwing. Who do you think is the one taking all the glory? It's the big green guy over there, Thrall. Not us. The players busted their humps to take down those bosses. But here he comes, big old Thrall, to come and take the satisfaction of landing that final brutal blow for you. I don't know, some people felt it was a little weird and shoehorned in to have him show up and just be like, hey everyone, hold my beer. I'll take it from here. But we move on to the next post from user Tiberius, who says this. Well, before Cataclysm, he was the war chief of the Horde, and many liked him. He was good at his job and represented the Horde and its ideals well. However, after Cataclysm launched, his story, in my opinion, went downhill. He became too perfect, and he started always taking our kills and glory, as in the entirety of Cataclysm's plot. I'm really tired of his story, and this has caused me to hate him. His story's too perfect, and when you really delve deeper in this later lore, at least, there's really nothing there. And the reason I raised that post is that even the people who used to be pro-Thrall from back in his glory days have started to turn on him. Blizzard has gone a little too nuts with the character, and they took a universally beloved figure and kind of made him hard to root for because he's been so crammed down our throats. But what do you think about Thrall? Please write to the show and let me know. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. As I said, next week we'll touch on all the positive posts about Thrall and tell everyone why he's so amazing and why you should be on board with loving him. If you have a positive post about Thrall, email it to me and I'll read it out. But with all that said now, it's time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic comes to you with some of the angriest posts that I've read throughout the week. And this week, we're obviously touching on all things Thrall. So we start with user Einbar, who says the following. As an avid Alliance player, I hate Thrall. The fact that I've killed him before shows that. My major problem with Thrall is one thing. Finally, a character goes neutral for the Horde. Great. Okay, I'm fine with that. But the fact that Chris Metzen decided that he would go back to the Horde makes me kind of mad, because a ton of Alliance characters have gone neutral to never return to the Alliance. But finally, a major Horde character goes neutral, and bam, he'll be back in no time. It's okay if you take characters and make them neutral, but when you put the one Horde character back and leave all the Alliance heroes there, it makes me wonder why I would even help Thrall. And we move on to the next post from Evelyn, who says this. A Mary Sue is a type of character who is unreasonably perfect and idealized. Before Cataclysm, Thrall was a great character. A good, well-developed guy with his own flaws. Reasonably strong, yet not godlike. And overall, just an interesting leader. Once Cata hit, he became way too perfect. He started acting like the savior of the world and an unstoppable force of goodness, even being capable enough to stand with the aspects as an equal. He earned the nickname Green Jesus, and not in a good light. Thrall became protected with a plot armor so strong that nothing bad could ever happen to him. He was much more interesting and complicated back when he was a war chief, but since Cata, he became boring. He appeared too often, and his presence often overshadows other characters who get less development in favour of him. Hence why people generally hate him these days. Next we have this post from user Adelphi. I don't like Thrall. I really don't. But for as much as people complain about how bad Thrall is, the player character is easily 100 times worse. Warcraft Mary Sue list should look like this. 1. Player character. 2, player character. 3, player character. Number 101, Thrall. Next we have this post from user Manaholic. Bring back the feuding hardcore all or nothing days. Please stop making the WoW characters politically correct. I'm dead serious. Stop Thrall's mantra of can't we all just get along? Since the Lich King expansion, the storyline and character development are flat and mediocre. Next we have this post from Hammerfest over at MMO Champion. I'm really getting tired of people referring to Thrall as a Jesus. It's tasteless, and there are no qualities Thrall has that can correlate him to Jesus any more so than any other heroic character. And on that note, with people getting bent out of shape, I will finish anger management, and now it's time for Tidbits. Each Friday, Countdown to Classic brings you just a few little-known pieces of information about the content that we've just discussed. So, the first tidbit I bring you this week is, did you know that at the end of the Hero of the Magar quest chain in Burning Crusade, players tell Thrall about Garadar and of Great Mother Gaia, his grandmother. Thrall immediately sets things in order and travels to Nagrand to speak with the only remaining blood relative he has left. And Great Mother Gaia tells him this. There is no doubt you are the heir of Durotan, my grandson. Draka told me she was with child before she and your father left our world, but I never dared dream that they would survive. Thrall says to her, they did not, grandmother. They were killed shortly after I was born. I never knew them. I was raised as a slave. To this day, I carry the name of Thrall. Great Mother Gaia says, Thrall, you've been a slave only to the past, grandson, but no more. When I last saw him, Durotan told me the name he would give his unborn son. He was so proud. Great Mother Gaia wipes away a tear. Great Mother Gaia then says, Goel, you are Goel, son of Durotan, rightful chieftain of the Frostwolves. This day, grandson, you are the great joy of my heart. Moving on to the next tidbit, and this is a quote from Chris Metzen at BlizzCon 2010 in the Quests and Lore question and answer session, and he talks about Thrall and says the following. The whole idea with Thrall is that can you argue that this guy he's so Clark Kent, right? So straight up. He does a good job all the time. He doesn't swear. He doesn't beat anybody down. He's a good leader. He's a noble soul. And he spent all of these years building and running the Horde, selflessly. And the idea is, does he really know who he is? Or after all these years, is it just more of a Bruce Wayne thing, where he's a little baby when his parents are murdered? He never really grew up with a whole lot of nurturing. And at this phase of his life, after all the things he's accomplished, it's possible that he's actually a little hollow inside. He's never taken time to just grow. Interesting little insight into Metzen's thoughts on Thrall. But is he talking about Thrall? Is he talking about himself? Who knows? I just found it quite interesting. But the next tidbit is again about Metzen. And did you know that Thrall is voiced by Chris Metzen in all of his game appearances, with the exception of Warcraft Adventures Lord of the Clans? The final tidbit is relating to the Warcraft movie. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, you'll note that Durotan's death is depicted quite differently from what I read out in this episode. There was no tragic lopping off of the arms and holding back the tears while you're reading out on a podcast about not being able to hold his baby boy as he died. But what we did get was the Mak Gara scene with Gul'dan. So, what actually happened was there was a bit of a fight to the death between Durotan and Gul'dan, and it was freaking awesome. That's my favorite scene in that movie, and quite frankly, one of my favorite Warcraft things of all time. That Mak'gora is just brilliant. And if you do want to hear all my thoughts about the Warcraft movie, as well as my co-hosts of my other podcast, The Cinephiles, that's cinephiles.com, SINNERFILES, if you like movies and comedy, go through the back catalogue of Countdown to Classic episodes, and you'll see, sitting right there at episode number 15, a breakdown of the Warcraft movie, which is really, really funny, really good fun. The three of us sat around and had a good laugh with Warcraft, so please do have a listen to that. And if you enjoy it, check out some more of the Cinephiles podcasts. But either way, it was a big discrepancy between the two. So some people wondered, God, are they messing with canon? But I'm pretty sure it was quite obvious that the Warcraft movie was in no way intended to supplant the canon of the game. So it was just a little bit of a bonus cool scene. Gul'dan, Durotan, 1v1, what happened? If you haven't seen the movie, check it out. But also Draka's death as well. Obviously that was a little bit different, with her able to send baby Goel down the river stream just as she was felled by another warrior. Anyway, now it's time for shout-outs and cleanup as we bring this episode to a wrap. And I want to start with an email I got from Teebling this week, who says the following. Hey buddy, congrats on the podcast. Looks like you have a good following and some great content already. I'll be listening. I was wondering if you'd like to check out the new fan forum I created as an alternative to the other forums. It's at barons.chat. Let me know what you think. Cheers, Teebling from Barons Chat. And I checked out this website, and you know what? I will always support content creators trying to build up something new, because that's exactly what this show is trying to do. And I'm only 9 weeks old now, guys, but obviously things are going swimmingly here at Countdown to Classic. But I'm more than happy to throw out a bit of a PSA for listeners of the show who are trying to build something of their own. So please do go and check out barons.chat. It's a fun new fan forum with a great looking theme, and it just looks like a nice little alternative to the usual. So if you're a bit tired of Reddit, or if you're a bit tired of the official forums, then by all means, go and check out barons.chat and say hello to Teebling. We move on to the next email, and this is from listener Chris, who says the following. Hi Josh, love the podcast and wanted to chime in on some of the comments made about the technical side to this project. You should first know that I'm not as invested in Classic as some, and even think that if held past release, #NoChanges may self-sabotage the game by enforcing stagnation. With that said, I also think the #NoChanges crowd is not hurting Classic and is actually doing Blizzard a favor. You see, it doesn't seem like Blizzard really wants to make many changes. They only have a couple developers at most on the project, from what I understand. That makes me think they're just using old code repositories and or version control to roll back to a specific point. And from there, they probably have a list of issues to hit before release, being either defects and deprecations. That's outdated code. Classic is getting a maintenance team, not a development team. #NoChanges helps minimize their workload, which in turn keeps the project grounded in a realm of feasibility. With that said, software development isn't actually very costly compared to maintenance, so don't mistake this as vastly raising the project cost here. Also, I wanted to throw in that disabling UI add-ons is probably completely within the realm of feasibility. Add-ons connect to the game via an API, which is almost certainly not used by any of the game's actual components. I'm not sure I'd support that being done, but it is indeed likely doable. Best regards, Chris. P.S. This email was particularly responding to episode number 19. I'll likely have to follow up later on other episodes. And I say thank you so much for emailing the show, Chris. Thank you for listening. Thank you for continuing to listen. And thank you so much for that technical information. I think a lot of people will enjoy that. And some of you may be nodding along or perhaps disagreeing. If you do disagree, email me, feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. But if you agree, also email me. But Chris raises a really good point, and it is one that I think would be a really interesting conversation. Are we getting somewhat of a maintenance team and not a development team. I can hear some of you shouting already, going, of course it's a development team. Are you crazy? They're making a new game. They're building it from the ground up. However, there has been rumbles that the team is not very large. So what are they really doing? Is the work not that difficult that they could colloquially be termed as more of a little bit of a maintenance team? If you develop software, if you code games, please do let me know. Adding on to that, I just want to say that Chris mentioned about disabling UI add-ons. And funnily enough, I just got off a call with the developer of Questy, one of the more popular add-ons in recent years for Vanilla WoW. And they indeed did tell me that it would just be like a flicking of a switch and Blizzard would easily be able to disable add-ons within the game. So it was interesting to hear the technical aspects of that, even though I had presumed that kind of was the case. It was interesting to go into the nitty-gritty of what happens technically with Blizzard and add-ons. That's an interview that will be coming to you many weeks down the track, however. I do apologize. But if you want a preview of that interview, there's a few minutes of it posted in the Countdown to Classic Discord. And in actual fact, you'll hear about half a dozen previews of coming interviews on the show. So if you want to see what's to come, and if you want to get a lot of chat about what is happening with Countdown to Classic, that peek behind the curtains, behind the scenes, I'm very active on the Discord. Come and talk to me and find out what I'm planning to do with the show. Then join the Discord. The link is in the show notes and also on the website. So please come along and say hi. We're super nice. Everyone's really polite and there's great conversation going on about all things World of Warcraft Classic. And so, with that being said, that's it for part 1 of All Things Thrall. I can't wait to finish this off next week. It's a great ending to the story, everyone, so stay tuned for story time with Josh, and I look forward to seeing you then. Apologies again for the slight delay on this episode. Occasionally, everyone, I do have to do a little bit of real life because I spend way too much time podcasting these days. I'm pumping out 5 a week, 3 for this show, 2 for another. It's hectic. So sometimes there will be very, very slight delays, but believe me, it bothers me more than you, and I rush as best as I can to get everything out to you as quickly as I can. So thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye.